old house groaned around Arthur Pendleton like a sighing beast. For 40 years, its sounds had been his symphony, the creak of the third stair, the winter whistle of the wind through the window frames, the gentle hum of the boiler in the cellar. He knew the house, and the house, it seemed, knew him. It was more than wood and plaster. It was a library of memories, the final and most precious collection of his late wife, Clara. Arthur was a cartographer by trade, a man who had spent his life mapping the world for others. Now, in his 75th year, his own world had shrunk to the confines of this house and the garden Clara had so lovingly cultivated. His only regular visitor was his nephew Ben and his ambitious wife, Haley. Ben, his sister's boy, had been like a son to him after she passed. Arthur had paid for his college education, co-signed the loan for his first real estate venture, and always had a plate for him at the dinner table. Tonight, they were over for their weekly dinner. Arthur had made Clara's specialty, a slow-roasted brisket. As Haley complimented him, her smile seemed a little too bright, her eyes a little too sharp. "Uncle Arthur, this is divine as always," she said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "You really shouldn't go to all this trouble for us." "Nonsense," Arthur chuckled, his voice a low rumble. "It's the highlight of my week. Keeps my hands busy. Speaking of which," Ben began, leaning forward. He had the kind of earnest face that made people trust him instantly. "Haley and I were talking. We worry about you here, all alone. This big house, the upkeep." "I manage just fine, son," Arthur said, a little more stiffly than he intended. "Of course you do," Haley chimed in smoothly, "but you've earned a rest. We found this wonderful community, Willow Creek Estates. It's more like a resort. Golf course, prepared meals, on-site medical staff. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." Arthur felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "I'm not looking to move, Haley." "Just think about it," Ben urged, placing a hand on his arm. "We could handle everything, selling the house, managing the finances. You could just relax." The conversation moved on, but the knot in Arthur's stomach remained. Later, as he was clearing the dishes, his old-fashioned landline rang. It was one of his old colleagues from the Geological Survey, and he stepped into his study to take the call, leaving the kitchen door slightly ajar. The call was brief. As he hung up, he heard Ben and Haley's voices from the living room, low but clear. He froze, his hand still on the receiver. "He's not going to budge, Ben. He's too stubborn." Haley's voice was sharp, stripped of its earlier sweetness. "I know, but we have to be delicate. He's getting more forgetful. Last week, he couldn't remember where he put his keys. It's the perfect foundation. Foundation for what? For him to sit on a $2 million property while we're struggling to close the deal on the Henderson building. That property is our ticket to the big leagues' patience." Ben's voice was placating. "We'll get a doctor to do an assessment. Dr. Miller owes me a favor. We just need to build the narrative." Confused elderly man, unable to manage his own affairs. Once we have power of attorney, we can move him to Willow Creek and list the house before he even knows what's happening. He trusts me completely. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him. Arthur felt the floor tilt beneath his feet, The hum of the boiler in the cellar suddenly sounded menacing. He wasn't just a burden. He was an obstacle, an asset to be liquidated. The brisket he'd cooked with such care turned to ash in his gut. He sank into his worn leather chair, the sounds of his house no longer a comfort, but a countdown. They thought his mind was a fading map, its landmarks blurred and its legends forgotten. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. The next morning, Arthur didn't call a lawyer. He called a cartographer's best friend, a surveyor, a man named George, whose father had worked with Arthur decades ago. He didn't ask George to survey the property line. He asked him to survey the house itself, every inch of it, with the latest laser scanning technology. "Everything, George," Arthur instructed, his voice firm. "I want blueprints more detailed than the ones the city has. Every joist, every pipe, every wire." While George's team worked, Arthur went to the attic. Pushed behind dusty trunks of Clara's old clothes was a large oak chest. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were his grandfather's journals and maps. His grandfather, Elias Pendleton, had been a prospector during the Colorado Gold Rush. The family had always known he'd made a small fortune, enough to buy the land this house was built on. But the details were lost to time. For 3 days, Arthur did what he did best. He cross-referenced, he analyzed, he mapped. He took his grandfather's cryptic journal entries, full of references to landmarks that no longer existed, and overlaid them with historical survey maps of the Denver area from the 1880s. He then overlaid those with the brand new, hyper-detailed blueprints of his own home. A pattern began to emerge, a series of measurements, 10 paces from the heart of the hearth, below the north-facing gable's shadow at noon. It wasn't a treasure map leading to a chest in the yard. The house was the treasure chest. His grandfather, a man deeply suspicious of banks, had built his fortune directly into the structure of the original homestead that formed the core of Arthur's much larger modern house. According to his calculations, a small brick-lined cavity lay sealed behind the thick stone fireplace in the main living room. Another was located in the cellar, beneath a section of the concrete floor that, on the new blueprints, looked subtly different in composition from the rest. His plan began to form, not out of rage, but with the cold, calculated precision of a mapmaker. He called Ben. "Son," he said, injecting a note of tired resignation into his voice, "you were right. I've been thinking about it. This old house, it's too much for me. I'd like to see that Willow Creek place you mentioned." He could almost hear the triumphant smile in Ben's voice. "Of course, Uncle Arthur. That's a wonderful decision. Haley and I will take you for a tour this Saturday." On Saturday, Arthur put on a convincing performance. He acted slightly confused by the paperwork, praised the bland food, and commented on how nice it would be not to climb stairs anymore. Ben and Haley exchanged smug, knowing glances. They left him with a brochure and a pile of preliminary forms, which Ben promised to help him with next week. The moment they were gone, Arthur made his second call, this time to a specialized construction crew, a company that dealt with historical renovations and, more importantly, prided themselves on discretion. "I need 2 jobs done," he told the foreman. "First, I need a section of my cellar floor excavated, carefully. And second, I need a non-destructive entry into my fireplace masonry. For the next 5 days, the house was a hive of quiet, careful activity. The crew used diamond wire saws to minimize dust and vibration. On the 3rd day, they broke through. The cavity in the cellar wasn't large, but it was full. Dozens of canvas sacks, brittle with age, contained not gold nuggets, but coins, gold dollars, double eagles, minted in the 1870s and 80s. Uncirculated, the find behind the fireplace was even more significant. It held a series of heavy cast-iron lockboxes. Inside were not coins, but gold bars, each stamped with the mark of the now-defunct Denver Mint. Arthur had the entire collection appraised by a discreet numismatist and a bullion expert. The coins alone, due to their rarity and pristine condition, were worth a small fortune. The bullion was worth millions. He liquidated a small portion, just enough for the next phase of his plan. The rest he had transported by armored car to a private, high-security vault downtown, registered under a newly created trust. No one but Arthur knew its true value or location. He let a week pass, filling it with phone calls to Ben, where he sounded increasingly frail and forgetful. He'd ask the same question twice, pretend to forget their dinner plans, and talk about a past that seemed jumbled. It was a perfect performance, and Ben took the bait every time. "Don't you worry, Uncle Arthur," Ben would say, his voice dripping with false concern. "We'll handle everything." The final act was set for a Tuesday. Ben and Haley were coming over with Dr. Miller for the informal assessment. They were also bringing the power of attorney documents for him to sign. That morning, Arthur had the construction crew return. Their job was simple. Using the original stones and perfectly matched mortar, they were to seal the fireplace and re-pour the concrete in the cellar, leaving absolutely no trace of their work. They finished by noon. The house was once again silent, guarding its emptied secrets. Arthur then placed a single, heavy cast-iron lockbox on the coffee table in the living room. It was one of the originals, but this one he had filled himself. Ben, Haley, and the doctor arrived at 2 o'clock. They found Arthur sitting calmly by the fireplace. "Uncle Arthur, this is Dr. Miller," Ben said, gesturing to the gray-haired man with a briefcase. "He's just here to chat." "A chat, of course," Arthur said with a placid smile. "But before we do, I have something for you, Ben. For you and Haley." He tapped the lockbox on the table. "A little piece of family history I uncovered. My inheritance from my grandfather, you could say. I want you to have it, as a thank you for, well, for everything." Ben and Haley's eyes widened with greed. The box was heavy, solid. It promised wealth. Ben shot a triumphant look at Haley. This was easier than they'd imagined. The old man was literally handing over his fortune. "Uncle Arthur, we can't," Ben said, the picture of humility. "I insist," Arthur said, "but it's heavy." "Why don't you open it here?" He handed Ben a small antique key. With trembling hands, Ben unlocked the box. He and Haley leaned over, their faces alight with anticipation. They lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was not gold, but stacks of paper. On top lay a single, crisp photograph. It showed the empty, brick-lined cavity behind the fireplace. Beneath it was another photo of the excavated hole in the cellar floor, also empty. Under the photos were neatly bundled documents. The first was a certified appraisal of the gold coins and bullion with a final valuation that made Haley gasp audibly. The next was a receipt from the vaulting company, confirming the deposit of the entire collection into an irrevocable trust. The beneficiary of the trust was not Ben, but the National Cartography and Geography Foundation, in the name of the Clara Pendleton grant. Ben's face went from confusion to pale, sickly white. Haley's jaw was slack with disbelief. What is this?" Ben stammered, shuffling through the papers. "That," Arthur said, his voice now devoid of any feigned weakness, "is my legacy. My grandfather's, mine, and Clara's. It will fund young explorers and map makers for the next 100 years. He then pointed to the final document at the bottom of the box. "And this," he said, his voice dropping to a cold, hard tone, "is for you." It was a bill, an itemized invoice from the construction and appraisal companies for their services, totaling over $50,000. And beside it, a legal document. It was a formal demand for repayment of the college tuition and the real estate loan Arthur had given Ben years ago, with interest calculated, citing a newly discovered breach of familial trust. "But the house," Haley whispered, her voice cracking. "The house is still worth millions." "The house?" Arthur said, a slow, cold smile spreading across his face. "Oh, the house has been donated. As of 8 a.m. this morning, the deed was transferred. It's the new headquarters for the foundation. I have a lifetime tenancy agreement, of course. I'm not going anywhere. But you are." Dr. Miller, who had been watching this unfold in stunned silence, slowly closed his briefcase. "I believe my services are not required here," he said, giving Ben a look of utter contempt before seeing himself out. Ben stared at his uncle, his earnest face finally crumbling to reveal the grasping, greedy man beneath. "How? You thought I was losing my memory, Ben," Arthur said, standing up. He seemed taller, stronger than he had in years. "But a man who spends his life mapping the world never forgets the details. He just learns to read the ones that others overlook. You saw a failing old man in a valuable house. I saw a nephew who had lost his way. The house is safe. My legacy is safe. Now, I believe you have your own way to find." He gestured to the door. Ben and Haley stumbled out, leaving the lockbox of ashes and consequences on the table. Arthur walked to the window and watched them go. The old house groaned around him, but it was no longer a sigh. It was a sound of satisfaction, a symphony of a world put right, its map redrawn, its treasures finally, truly secure.